Buckle up because things are about to get awfully scientific around here. I'll be right back. Hey there, Gracious Gang. It's Mike Creevy from thegraciousguest.org with you for another episode of The Gracious Guest Show here on YouTube if you're watching, or if you're just listening. I shouldn't say just listening. Listeners to the podcast, you know how to find it because you're here. So if you don't and you want to check out the podcast, make sure you go to anywhere podcasts are found: Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, of course, Pocket Casts. There's all kinds of great podcast aggregators and websites out there. Anywhere where you can leave a review and a rating, I'd really appreciate that. And also on the YouTube channel, if you haven't yet subscribed, make sure you do that. It really helps get the word spread about anything we're doing here on the Gracious Guest Show. So like this, the little thumbs up down there helps. Share it far and wide. I really appreciate that. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Bob Rucker. Robert Rucker spent 38 years in the nuclear industry as a nuclear engineer before turning his attention to the Shroud of Turin, which he had always been interested in since a young age. But he really found a very interesting set of personal and professional connections and competencies and skills and interests pertaining to the Shroud and Shroud research that he really brings to the table in a unique way. Bob can be found online. I have the link down here for you to check out in the show notes. The Shroud Research Network. So it's shroudresearch.net. Really highly encourage you to check it out. And if you go there, I'm clicking on it now just to double check this. He has all kinds of different incredible information and just a treasure trove of papers to read through. To date, he's got 33 papers he has posted on there dealing with all kinds of different issues, carbon dating in a special way. He really focuses on that, has some very interesting theories we're going to get into here in just a second. So definitely check out shroudresearch.net and those links. That link is below for you to check that out. But let's dive into the actual interview because you're really going to enjoy this. It's pretty awesome. So without further ado, here's my interview with Robert Rucker talking about science and the Shroud of Turin. All right, that looks good. Well, Bob Rucker, thank you so much for coming on the Gracious Guest Show to talk about the Shroud and all sorts of related things. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yes, glad to be here.
Well, and so anyone, I think, who's been looking for various Shroud-related presentations and that sort of thing on YouTube or on Googling, like Shroud.com, various other outlets, and certainly I have the link for the Shroud Research Network as well in the show notes. There are certainly people watching this who are familiar to some degree with your work, but for those who aren't, want to give us your rough sketch of your backstory a little bit and just how you got interested in the Shroud to begin with.
Well, my interest in the Shroud goes back a long time. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I was delivering newspapers, and the Sunday paper came out, and I had some time after I finished my paper route before my parents would get up. So I was looking through a little magazine that came out in the Sunday paper called Parade, and it was, out in a lot of the papers across the country. But in that, I saw a little picture about that big with kind of a fuzzy-looking face. You could recognize it as a face, but to the right of it had 3 or 4 sentences, and the last one said, "A lot of people believe that this is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus." And I thought, well, that can't possibly be true, because if it were, it'd be so well known, so popular that why would anyone talk about anything else? So,
right.
And so I thought, well, it just can't be. And so then, I don't know, a while later, I thought, well, I needed to be a little bit more open-minded than that. So in looking through various bookstores at the time, I found a book, and then I found another book, and then I found another book on the Shroud of Turin, bought them and read them. And so that always stuck with me. But once I finished up with my master's degree in nuclear engineering at the University of Michigan and went into a nuclear industry, I was just too busy to do anything about it, really. But I spent 38 years in the nuclear industry, primarily running nuclear analysis computer calculations, and doing for several years doing statistical analysis of measurement data. And it turned out that those were the 2 items that I believe were crucial in being able to solve the carbon dating problem for the Shroud of Turin. And so then after I exited from the nuclear industry, I finally had some time, and finally the computers were fast enough. And
Sure.
Thirdly, there was a computer that could actually, a computer code that could actually do the work that I wanted to.
Okay.
And so I had actually spent about 12 years using that computer code. It's called MCNP, Monte Carlo N particle, where N stands for neutrons. And that was developed over multiple decades at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And so it has an excellent pedigree. It's approved by the Department of Defense and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for general nuclear analysis of computer, fissile material in nuclear reactors or in other configurations. So that's what I had extensive background in. And so then finally, it was about 9 or 10 years ago, that I finally had enough time. And I spent about 6 months running those computer calculations on my desktop computer that were needed to, I think, to analyze what was the first suggestion as to the concept to explain the carbon dating of the shroud. And that was neutron absorption, was actually proposed in 1989. And there were several others later. But that proposal was never followed up on until I did the nuclear calculations on it. So that's just a brief background.
Sure.
Just on my work on the shroud, for example, in 2017, right there is the handout for the Shroud conference that I organized in 2017. We had 28 Shroud researchers from Italy, Spain, France, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and the United States come to this conference. We had a couple hundred people attend it, and it was a 4-day conference. 4-day conference. And that was located in Pasco, Washington. Now I live in the next community over in Richland.
Okay.
And then just to show off some of the other items, let me show you this in order to get it off my desk.
Sure.
This is the pile of papers that I published.
Oh wow!
I have 33 papers are published on my internet site, shroudresearch.net. Shroud is spelled SHROUD, shroudresearch.net. And as occasion allows, I publish other things as well. For example, in Materials Evaluation, February issue of this year, I had a 13-page article, very nice article, on mysteries of the Shroud of Turin. So that was then in the technical arena.
Okay.
And then most of my work has been done actually on the carbon dating of the shroud, and this is the main document related to the carbon dating of the shroud. I think it's 22 different authors, the first one being P.E. Damon. So this is usually called Damon. And then the problem, as I see it, with that was not the violation of their own procedures, but it was actually in the statistical analysis of the data. And that's what 4 recent publications concluded. There's actually 4 there that were peer-reviewed and published in peer-reviewed journals. But actually in the first peer-reviewed journal that carried the article Damon, it also had the very first proposal for solving the carbon dating with the concept of neutron absorption. We have that. We have the best paper on producing the image of the face was actually done with infrared femtosecond pulse laser processing. Wow. Well, so
I'll have to break that one down.
Yes, infrared. So this is using electromagnetic radiation, like light.
Yes.
Except in the infrared range, and it was a pulse, extremely short pulse of that radiation. They call it a femtosecond. That's 10 to the minus 15th second.
Wow.
So it's an extremely small amount of time. But that's what they had to do in order to produce the very best appearance of the face on the Shroud of Turin. In other words, any common type of technology that you have today can't even get close to producing the image on the shroud. And then probably the high point in the media was the June 1980 edition of National Geographic. June 1980. And that had a beautiful 4-page fold-out on the Shroud of Turin, that showing the body and all the wounds and everything. And that's still available, through the internet for $3 or $4 plus shipping. So that's an excellent resource for people to have. I have 3 or 4 copies of that for when they go up to $100 each.
Right, sure. Well, in that the experiment you were just discussing there with the infrared, did they? I wasn't as familiar with that particular one. Were they able to duplicate at least some of the image characteristics as far as the high resolution characteristics of it, the 3-dimensional properties, or is that still something that's contributing to the mystery here?
Yes. What I say was that, and maybe you can see it here. I'll put my finger on it, and maybe we can get a picture of it right there. Okay. That's what I'm calling the best image of the face on the shroud. Oh, okay. But it doesn't duplicate the microscopic characteristics of the shroud, only the macroscopic, the large scale, as you just look at it. Now, no other proposal has duplicated even the macroscopic properties of the shroud. You look at it and you say, well, that tells me that's not how it was done, because it doesn't duplicate it. But at least this duplicated the macroscopic properties. But there's been various attempts using ultraviolet light, infrared light, or protons, proton irradiation of linen. And all of them can produce something similar to the type of discoloration that we see on the linen on the shroud, though they don't claim to produce the microscopic characteristics of the shroud. That's never been duplicated.
And so, these duplications that you're discussing here, so you say some of the characteristics, for example, like being on those uppermost fibrils of the cloth and not penetrating through the other side, those things, but nothing, like you said, nothing microscopic, nothing comprehensive.
That's right. Yeah. So that you can say that on this infrared laser, you can say that the best example of the face was produced by radiation controlled by information. I think that's a legitimate conclusion. But that doesn't prove it was done with infrared any more than the ultraviolet or proton irradiation prove that it was done by ultraviolet or proton irradiation. Because as far as I have read, and I've only been in this for 9 or 10 years, mind you. Some people have been in this for, my friend Mark Antonacci has 40 years, and on others more than that. And so it takes a long time to come up to speed on this, because there's just such an immense amount of information on it. I have 2 stacks of paper here, probably 10 or 12 inches tall, of papers that I want to read.
Where's the time?
Where's the time? You do the best you can.
Yeah, that's true. How did you... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, it's like each person, a researcher, brings to the table his own specialties. If it's like Paulo de Lazaro, what he brought to the table was his specialty and equipment in running ultraviolet lasers. And so that's great. And then what I bring is ability to run nuclear analysis, computer calculations. And so you use those tools and then try and solve some of the mysteries and just see what you come up with on the results. Do the results that you come up with using your specialty agree with the actual evidence on the shroud? And if they do, then that's significant. If they don't, well, you go on and try something else.
Right. Well, how did you? So I guess when you saw, I guess it would have been around the carbon dating. What's the word I'm looking for? The news breaking certainly worldwide. 1980. Yeah. And is that you said something about the maybe a number of people or one person, I didn't catch how many people it was, suggesting this neutron absorption as a possible explanation for that back then. And did that catch your eye at the time as something because of your own interest? Is that when that particular question mark popped up in your own mind, or?
No, it wasn't. I was not aware of that until I started on my full-time work on the shroud.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that I probably read the paper on the carbon dating where the data was actually published. I probably read that a couple of years after it was published. So maybe
I see
1991 or 1992. But sitting in the back room of the library, I had to go through the stacks to find it. But I finished reading it, and I was very puzzled. And so you kind of struggle, because I'd read 2-3 books at that point, and I was convinced that it really was the authentic burial cloth of Jesus.
Right.
And so therefore, it should date to the 1st century. And so then when I read that the carbon dating that they came up with gave an uncorrected date of 1260 plus or minus 31, which they then corrected for the changing carbon-14 concentration in the atmosphere, which is based on tree rings, believe it or not. Tree ring counting, then you do carbon dating of that tree ring. So they correct it then for those changing concentration. And so they expanded it from 1260 to 1390. So that's the range that they usually quote. And they quote it as a 2 sigma, that is a 95% confidence level. But it's only a 95% confidence level if you know the basic number, the 1260 plus or minus 31, with absolute certainty, which you don't. So it's a form of deception, I'm afraid. And, especially the media is very easy to fool because they don't understand what the scientists are saying. Not really. They kind of have a general feeling for it, but you have to go back to the scientific literature itself to find out what the real truth is on it. Okay.
And so,
but anyway.
Oh, yes. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
And sitting in the back room of the library, I thought for about 2-3 minutes, and I thought, this cannot be true, because I know that the nails, the Bible says, went through his hands. So all the paintings from the Middle Ages have it going through the palm.
Right.
But I knew, based upon experimentation with cadavers, that would not support a man weighing about 170 pounds, because there's no bone structure above it. So it had to go into the wrist.
Right here.
That's right.
In other words, so you have to go down.
That's right. So it had to go through the wrist. And there's one place there where it can go through the wrist without breaking any bones, in fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Right.
So I knew that it could not be from the dating period that the carbon dating came up with, 1260 to 1390, because all the paintings from the Middle Ages had it through the palm, yet it can't be. It has to be through the wrist. The shroud gets it right. All the paintings from the Middle Ages get it wrong. Okay. Also, when that nail went through that location in the wrist, all the feelings from the hand are focused down into the nerve that goes through that location, so that the nail going through then is crushed, thus automatically folding over the thumb. And so you look on the Shroud of Turin, it gets it right. There's no images of the thumbs. But on the paintings from the Middle Ages, the thumbs are prominently shown, just indicating that anything from the Middle Ages is not authentic, whereas the shroud is.
Right.
So I knew that the carbon dating was wrong. And so I sat there. Well, I had an advantage at that point because at that point in my life, sitting in the back room of the library, I had 19 years experience in calculating neutron distributions in nuclear reactors. I was in nuclear reactor design at that point. And so I could look at the data in the paper and tell what was wrong with it.
Wow.
And so, but I couldn't do anything about it because I didn't have the time, the computer code, or a computer fast enough until I started this about 2011 or 12.
And so, and just to clarify, Bob, so just in other words, just based on your own scientific experience, like you were saying earlier, everybody brings their own particular skills to the table. You're looking not just at an article, not just at a summary. You're looking at this data, and you can see something's off with the data because it's a series of patterns that you're a little more accustomed to seeing, but you don't have the capacity right then and there to run it to actually show what's the matter with it. Is that a decent summary? Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So that based on my 19 years of engineering experience, and that's extremely valuable in doing anything like this. I knew that if there was a human body laying on the back bench of a limestone tomb, as it would have been designed in first century Jerusalem, and if that body were to emit neutrons from the body, okay, very interesting concept, because with me being in nuclear engineering, those are the terms that I would think in terms of neutrons and what would neutrons do. So if we think in terms of neutrons being emitted from the body, and all of this connects later on in my research, but if neutrons were emitted from the body, they're very penetrating. They go through the air gap between the body and the cloth. They go right through the cloth, 99.9% of them. They go through the air. They then go into the limestone. They bounce around about 150 times in the limestone, bouncing off the nuclei. Neutron doesn't have any charge, so it's not interacting with the electrons.
Right.
They're bouncing off the nuclei. And so in that process, they take on a characteristic shape, neutron distribution shape in the tomb. And so that's just based on my 19 years of experience in nuclear engineering. So that I knew that the neutron flux would peak up over the center of the body. It would fall off toward the head, would fall off toward the feet. So down at the feet where the samples were cut from the shroud in 1988, I knew that there would be a significant slope in the neutron density across those three samples. See, because carbon dating is a destructive process.
Right.
So that they couldn't send the same sample to the three different laboratories. The best they could do would be to cut them from the cloth right next to each other. So that's what they did. But even so, the distance of those three samples was only about that far. Yet I reasoned that even over that inch and a half or so space for the three different samples that went to the three laboratories, there would be a significant slope to the neutron distribution in the tomb. And so that I knew that neutron distribution would be absorbed in nitrogen-14, and there's actually three different mechanisms on this, but it's turned out that nitrogen-14 absorption of neutrons produce the most carbon-14. In other words, nitrogen-14 absorbs a neutron and immediately kicks out a proton and changes to carbon-14. That changes what's calculated as the carbon date of the shroud. So sitting in the back room of the library.
So is it basically new carbon-14 essentially being produced here? Is that part of this?
That's what we're talking about. Because in carbon dating, what they do is they don't measure the date.
Right.
They measure the carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio of samples. Then the date is calculated based on an assumption. Now, this is important. The calculation of the date is based on the assumption that that ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 has only changed due to decay of the carbon-14. So
as it normally does.
Which, normally it does.
In other words, this would have to assume that we're dealing with something that is just like anything else at the end of the day, or that follows the same
that's
sort
exactly
of...
right.
Right.
The basic assumption there is that these samples were taken from a piece of linen that's no different than any other piece of linen in the world. Okay?
Right.
Well, I would submit to you that's not a legitimate assumption for the burial cloth of Jesus. Okay?
Yeah.
Because if the body disappeared, dematerialized, whatever word you want to use, made a transition into an alternate dimension, those are various phrases, went to heaven, that's another phrase.
Right.
Thus, disappearing from within the cloth, not going through the cloth, disappearing from within the cloth so that the cloth would simply collapse. Now, if that were true, then that's a nuclear process. And what other effects could it have had on the Shroud of Turin? You can't just assume it away. You have to get data. You have to look at the data to sort it out. And that's what I was doing in the back room of the library. So what I said was that if there's a slope over these 3 different samples, then the amount of new carbon-14 produced in each of those samples would be different. It would increase the closer you get to the center of the body. It would have less new carbon-14 produced closer to the bottom of the shroud. So that the experimental date should be different. Okay. And it should be in sequence, so that the sample closest to the bottom, then the sample in the middle, and then the sample furthest from the body should be increasing in date. So I simply looked at the evidence in this piece of paper from 1989. Bingo.
You're not making anything up. You have this hypothesis, and you go and you look at the data itself to see if that bears out in the data.
And bingo, that's exactly what I see.
Well, that's interesting.
And I don't know if anyone saw that before, other than Tom Phillips, who made the suggestion, also in 1989, that it's untrustworthy to be doing carbon dating, because with this unique item, that we don't know how the image was formed. Therefore, you don't know what other things went on with the Shroud of Turin. How in the world can you justify trusting carbon dating?
Right.
And the answer is you can't.
Well, it pins everything on that hook, so to speak.
Yes.
And if I may, just a quick little quote here, because this is from one of your papers I wanted to mention, because I highlighted this, and I think it goes to this point you're making. And you wrote here, but if the biblical account is to be taken at face value, so that Jesus was actually resurrected, then this would have been a totally unique event. Where's that here? We would have no basis to rule out other totally unique events associated with it, such as radiation being emitted from within the volume of the body. Therefore, in this case, we conclude that we should allow for the possibility that radiation was emitted from the body while it was wrapped in the shroud, even though we may not know the specific mechanism involved.
Yes,
I really like the wording of that. This, if you close off, in other words, the supernatural, if you want to put it that way, that bluntly, and I want to get into this more with you maybe as we go on. Strictly speaking, science isn't equipped to measure the realm of the spirit. Of course, by definition, that's not within the purview of the scientific method, right? Which is exploring directly, essentially, you could say creation, right? Space, matter, time, energy. But if you rule out this transcendent realm, if you just basically proceed with this attitude that doesn't exist, and we're not going to find anything that could be affected from outside something we understand, it really seems to me that really sort of predetermines the outlook that you're, or the outcome you're hoping to get, if that makes sense.
Yes, science has many limitations, and people don't realize this. Science, as done in our universe, is done within a four-dimensional framework, 3 dimensions of space, X, Y, and Z coordinates, from any corner in any room can define locations of any point in the universe. So space has 3 dimensions. Time has 1 dimension, forward. That's all that there is. So that we live in a universe of 4 dimensions. But it's not legitimate to simply assume that that's all that there is. Indeed, string theory, I like to bring this up. String theory says that to explain certain experiments in modern physics, you need to have at least 10 or 11 dimensions, and maybe as many as 26. So in other words, if that's true, and it hasn't been proven true, there's problems with that concept, but there's a lot of beauty to the equation, and scientists like to follow beauty, believe it or not. And there's a lot of evidence that there is something to this, though maybe there hasn't been a completely consistent string theory developed yet. But if that's true, then our 4 dimensions are just a very small subset of at least 10 or 11 dimensions. So that, and our science only deals with the 4 dimensions. So how can you rule out things that are beyond our current concept of the laws of physics? See, I don't like to use the words miracles or miraculous or supernatural. I understand what I mean by it, but I'm not sure if other people understand what I mean by it. And when they use the words, I'm not sure I understand what they're using as the definitions. And often, if I use those terms with a scientist, you can tell by their facial expression, they go brain dead. They stop listening. They categorize you as a nutcase, and it's not worth their time to spend on it. So if I say miracle, then I'm categorized. But if I say I'm talking about an event that is outside of our current understanding of the laws of physics, they say, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
So it's all in how you phrase it.
Sure. Well, so is I'm trying to think of there's so many different directions we could go with this. I don't know if there was a follow-up that you wanted to make to that specific, discovery with the neutron absorption at all, or if there's something else you'd like to go into here, because
I will a little bit.
Explore we could explore all kinds of things. Yeah.
So, well, the carbon dating, you'll hear people say that the carbon dating has disproven the Shroud of Turin because it provided a date of 1260 to 1390 with a 95% confidence limit.
Right.
But the only thing, there's several problems with that. One is that that's not the only data that the carbon dating experiments provided. And whatever theory you come up with has to be consistent with everything, okay, to be legitimate. Your concept to explain what the experiments gave you has to be consistent with all the data, not just part of it. So that in saying that the shard was carbon dated to 1260 to 1390, all you're doing is that you've taken the carbon dates for the 16 subsamples, and you've done a degree of statistical analysis, not legitimately, I don't believe, to come down to one value. Okay. But what about explaining all 16 values?
Right. Okay.
So that each of the laboratories, they cut the sample that they received into 3, 4, or 5 different, or was it 3, 4, or 5 different pieces. And then later we found out that the laboratory that reported 4 values actually had 8 values. Very strange why they wouldn't produce the actual data. It's maddening how badly this was done. But anyway, so you had average values from the 3 different laboratories. So that if you plot the average values from the 3 different laboratories on a graph as a function of the distance from the bottom of the shroud, it's not level. There's a slope to it. In other words, the sample location the carbon date is dependent on from where the sample came.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't be the case. Every carbon date should be the same, but it's not. That tells you something strange is going on. Okay, so there's the date, there's the slope, and then there's the distribution and range. That's related to the 16 different values, so that they're going to have a certain distribution from 1155 to 1410. So you have to explain why that range occurred. And then it occurred to me that there was actually, those were the three different things we learned from the carbon dating of the shroud. But there's actually a fourth carbon dating item that we learned, and this is related to the Cedarium, which is the face cloth of Jesus, located in Oviedo, Spain, based upon good historical documentation. And when they did carbon dating on that, they came up with about 700 AD. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the conclusion that you come to from all this carbon dating information has to be consistent with the date, slope, and distribution / range of the data from the shroud and the date from the Cedarium. Mm-hmm. And my neutron absorption hypothesis is consistent with all four of those values, which is astonishing.
Yeah. And why? And could you take us through a little bit more detail here about the Cedarium? Because I just want to understand why. So again, because that obviously should be from the first century as well.
Yes, from the first century.
And that, if it is indeed the face cloth of Jesus and the events went as they're described in the New Testament, that face cloth is removed, as I understand it, before the actual shroud is wrapped around him for the final phase of the burial, but it's laid to the side, where it talks about, of course, in the resurrection accounts of seeing these cloths, right? Plural, or the face cloth is off to the side. The napkin, it's sometimes translated. So what? How would you explain here the difference in the dates between these two cloths, respective of one being on the body and one nearby but not on the body?
Yeah. So the samples from down near the feet, the carbon date was shifted by neutron absorption in nitrogen 14 to produce new carbon 14. Right. The date was shifted from about 33 AD up to, let's say, the mid-range of 1260 to 1390 is 1325. So it was shifted from 33 AD up to 1325. And that was because that was very close to the body.
Right.
Okay. But the Cedarium now, let's consider the Cedarium. That's the face cloth. Cedarium is actually the Greek word that's used for this piece of cloth in the New Testament, Cedarium.
Right.
So I like to think that it was the Apostle John. He was at the foot of the cross, the only apostle left at the foot of the cross. Would have him in the tomb doing the burial at the front of the pit or stand-up area in the tomb. He was actually manipulating the body and the claws and whatnot. You probably would have Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea there as well. Probably the three of them were involved in bringing the body down and then transporting it to the tomb. So that, but whoever it was, Apostle John was probably in the tomb anyway. But as an apostle, he would have a priority. So that they'd bring the body in, they'd lay it down on the backside of the cloth over what now is the dorsal image, the back image.
Right.
But before they wrap the top over the body, the person at the front of the pit area would reach over and take off the face cloth. Okay, now there'd be according to an archaeologist that did excavation in first century Jewish times, he said that this typical type of tomb with a rolling stone in front of it had a left bench, a right bench, and a back bench. The body would be on the back bench because John, when he and Peter were running to the tomb, bent down and looked in through the door. That'd be the only source of light.
Right.
No skylights, no windows, nothing. He had to stand well back to let light in so that he could see it. So when he saw the body cloth, he was looking at the back bench. So that's where the body was. So that's where I modeled it in my MCNP nuclear analysis computer calculations. but there'd also be a right bench. Now, most people are right-handed. So the most reasonable place for that Cedarium to be, that face cloth to be, in the tomb, when the person at the front of the pit area reached over, took that face cloth off the body, he'd simply drop it next to his body on the right bench. So I thought, okay, that's just my guess, but let's see how it compares with my computer output. Okay? Because I hadn't done that yet. Okay, that would be interesting. Now, to do that, I actually had to rerun a case and put a piece of cloth on the left bench and on the right bench in order to find out how much, how many
give you like a control on that.
Absorbed.
Okay, yeah.
And neutron absorption is a function of distance. Now, I told you that the neutron distribution, there's a neutron distribution in the tomb, and the further you get from the body, the neutron density goes down. Okay?
Right.
So this cloth would then be on the right side bench. It would be kind of up near where his head would be, but maybe 2 feet away from his head. Now, the neutron density is falling off rapidly in that area, according to my nuclear calculations. So that would mean that fewer neutrons would be absorbed in nitrogen-14 to produce less carbon-14, and thus only shift the date for the Cedarium from 33 AD to 70 AD. So I looked at where I guessed where the Cedarium would be, about even with the body, with the person doing the burial, with his body. He just absentmindedly dropped it there. He wouldn't throw it behind him or anything. He just absentmindedly drop it there. And when I looked there, that's what the carbon date was, 700 AD. So in other words, this concept satisfies my predictions, and is consistent with all the evidence that we have. There is no other concept which is consistent with all the evidence.
Well, because I'm thinking now too. Because the medieval Reweave Theory, and there's others that I've heard as well that would perhaps account for sufficiently. Based on my little knowledge, I'm still relatively new to all this myself, but it makes a good case for, an explanation for a potential shift in that carbon dating or dating a part of the cloth that's a newer patch, that kind of thing. But that wouldn't explain the later date, the 8th century date on the Cedarium. So I find this very intriguing that here's one theory that potentially accounts for both of those phenomena, which is very, very fascinating.
The invisible reweave. See, there's been 5 or 6 different concepts to explain the carbon dating of the cloth. The neutron absorption was the first. The invisible reweave was the 5th out of 6 different proposals. Number 2, 3, 4, and 6 have with further consideration, have generally been rejected. So that the primary one in the media that you see is invisible reweave. My proposal now is contesting that. So there's a conflict. Either one could explain the date on the shroud. And the invisible reweave not only can explain the date on that corner of the shroud, it can, under the right assumptions, also explain the slope. That is, at the interface between the new material that was added about 1520, Joe Marino says, and the old material from 33 AD, that interface has to be sloped across the sample area in order to explain the spatial distribution of the carbon date. That's possible. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the distribution range. That's where the invisible reweave theory runs into problems, and I've not proven it yet, but my engineering judgment again tells me that that's going to be very unlikely, and you can tell why, because that sample that was sent out to the laboratories, in order to take the new material from 1520 and the old material from 33 AD, and to date both of them together and produce a date of 1325, it had to be mostly new material. Indeed, it had to be 86% new material and only 14% old linen from 33 AD.
Okay.
So when you're talking about that much new material and you're cutting these samples into subsamples, there are going to be subsamples, very likely, that are only new material.
Sure, yeah, makes
So
sense.
it should carbon date to 1520,
Right.
but none of them did. And you should have some samples that were much larger than 14% old material and much less the new material, so that those subsamples should date much younger than 1155, but they don't. So that now I have to do further calculations on this in order to resolve this, and that's going to take me another 6 months to a year or so.
Okay.
But also, it's very clear that the invisible reweave of the shroud does not explain the carbon date of the Cedarium.
Right.
Because they're two different pieces of cloth.
Fascinating.
Okay. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is. And I hate to say this, Bob. We only have like another minute or two here. But we can be a little flexible with it. But I did want to just ask you here. You know, man, you were just telling me before we got on that you were at this conference and you have hundreds of slides that we could potentially access and go through, and I'm just chomping at the bit to dig in on more. But is there anything, if you had to pick anything in particular that's really exciting you, or something else that you think overall, you know, key takeaways from your experience with this, or just for anybody who's on the fence about all this, you know, what why this shroud stuff might be worth looking into?
Oh well, yes. Let me just tell you.
Yeah.
You know, that was what I did up until about 3 years ago. What I've been telling you. Okay.
Yeah.
So what have I been doing since then? Well, I've extended this neutron absorption hypothesis, which said that neutrons were emitted from the body, took on a characteristic cosine shape in the tomb, peaking over the center of the body, falling off toward the head and toward the feet to explain the carbon dating of the corner of the shroud. Well, where did the neutrons come from? Okay. Well, they probably came from a splitting of deuterium atoms, because deuterium nuclei, because splitting of a deuterium nucleus requires the least amount of energy. But in the process of a deuterium nucleus splitting, what else do you get? You get protons. So we developed a concept for explaining how the images were formed on the Shroud of Turin that works. That is, this concept is unique in all of Shroud research, because it's really quite amazing. It's consistent with all the evidence related to image formation, carbon dating, and how the blood that it even provides a possibility, I'll say it that way, for how the blood that would have dried on the body was thrust off the body and onto the cloth. The problem being that blood that had dried on the body could not be absorbed onto cloth. Dried blood doesn't absorb onto cloth.
Right.
So that the blood on the arms, for example, you have to thrust that off. How did that occur? Well, it occurs by an extremely brief, extremely intense burst of radiation from within the body. That radiation, including protons and neutrons, being vertically collimated to explain the good resolution images on the front and dorsal images. It also explains the superficiality of the threads, superficiality and the model appearance of the threads. It explains the three-dimensional information on the cloth. It explains why the image is a negative image. It explains it. It's consistent with everything. And beside that, besides being consistent with image formation, carbon dating, and this aspect of the blood, thus explaining three items on the cloth, which is unique. There's no other hypothesis that explains more than one problem. This explains three. So in a scientific perspective, it's highly preferred. It's given higher credibility if your hypothesis explains multiple otherwise unexplained phenomenon of the item that you're explaining. This explains 3.
Sure.
None of the others explain more than 1.
Wow. That is this, have you recently published on, well, so you said you've been doing this the last 3 years. Has this been a series of publications on this?
So that in my development of papers, over the 33 papers on shroudresearch.net, you can go to the third page is my research page, where I list my papers in reverse order, 33 being the most recent, and that documents my presentation that I made in March at a Christian apologetics conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have submitted a paper for this next conference, this coming March, and I'm going to be talking about image formation.
Okay. Wow.
So that in my 33 papers that I have on my website, especially the last few, you can see some of the development of these concepts for how the image was formed. So one paper was solving the mysteries of the Shroud of Turin, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That goes into it quite a bit.
Okay.
My paper 32 we actually had to abbreviate it, unfortunately, to get it into the journal Materials Evaluation.
Okay.
But in paper 33, I'm talking about multiple different issues, but one of the main things I'm talking about is this concept, this one hypothesis explaining the image, the blood, the image, the carbon dating, and the blood. This is called the vertically collimated radiation burst hypothesis. So I use an acronym there, VCRB hypothesis.
Okay.
Vertically collimated radiation burst hypothesis.
Gotcha. Okay. And we did, I have it linked below, in the show notes here for anybody watching, or for the listeners as well, because I put this out audio podcast, as well. So
Yes.
We'll definitely have your link down there for them to check out. And I recommend everybody do that as soon as they're done here, to go check out more. So Bob, thank you so much though for coming on the show today. There's so much more to go into. I'll have to have you back on at some point if you're able to do it. So
Sure.
Well, God bless you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Now, full disclosure, and I told Bob this right off the bat when we started. I said I was always very interested and continue to be very interested in science in general, various sciences, especially astronomy, as it was always the most interesting for me personally. But that doesn't mean I was very, very good at it necessarily. And math and science were always the subjects I struggled with the most personally. So no real change in that regard. But I have a tremendous interest, and this kind of thing is very fascinating to me. So I'm jotting all kinds of notes down. We talked for a little while afterwards about some of the articles I definitely want to go dig into a little bit more deeply. And so wherever you're coming from, I hope this really was an encouragement to you. This was recommended actually by a subscriber on our YouTube channel. Asked a while back if I had ever seen the work of Robert Rucker, which got me interested and checked out what Bob has been doing. So that's an invitation to any of you to get in touch with me. Go to the website, thegraciousguest.org. If you want to reach me through my website, you can do that. If you want to leave any comments below too in the video, I do check those out as best I can from time to time, and I really do appreciate your guys' thoughts, your guys' comments, your guys' leads as well, for me to find more inspiring and interesting and mysterious topics and content to go deeper into on the Gracious Guest Show, because this is all about wonder and awe. That's what this channel's for. So thank you guys. God bless you. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.